Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Hai Fong. As you can see, I am joined by war correspondent, independent journalist Elijah Magnier. Everyone hit the like button as we get started. But Elijah, good to be back with you.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Right. Well, let's get started with the latest developments. I just wanted your comments over the last period since this show was covering the latest updates. We had Iran fire 13 different missiles, according to reports from Times of Israel, blackouts in Tel Aviv. We also had strikes in the recent hours, I believe, on Negev near the Dimona Research Facility again. And we also have, of course, as Iran continues its Operation True Promise 4, all of this ceasefire talk, Israeli media leaked out some kind of document, 15-point plan that the Trump administration had concocted, supposedly. They said there's been reports that they sent it by text message. There's no clarity as to Donald Trump's reports on who his administration is actually talking to in Iran. And of course, Iran has said that they're not talking to the United States at this point, going so far to say that the U.S. at this time is negotiating with itself. So all of this is happening as the U.S. is preparing about 3,000 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division to head to the Middle East. So Elijah, given this context, maybe you can go over the latest developments in the war over the last day or so and help us understand what this all means right now, where we're at.
Okay, so let's start with the negotiation, perhaps first. Now, we know that Donald Trump on a Monday, just before the opening of the stock market, dropped a bomb saying that I'm talking to the Iranians, the excellent, fantastic decision maker, negotiators, and that contradict everything he said the day before that we killed everybody, there's nobody to negotiate with. And by saying that, he calmed down the market that was already prepared to crush, and then the price of oil was prepared to go even down from 120 or 113, and then to go up again. But that calmed everything, and everything had stopped since. And also, he said that this is going to take 5 days, that he's giving the time for the Iranians to think about it and for the negotiations to advance. And by coincidence, these 5 days coincide with the Friday when the market will close down. So he has managed basically to calm down the market. But what he has also achieved to give time for his forces to reach the Middle East. And I will talk about that, but let us continue the negotiation, if I may. Yes, the Iranians said that Trump is negotiating with himself. This is not the first time that Trump says something that is untrue. When he negotiated with the Iranians, gave them an appointment on a Monday in June 2025, and the war started on a Friday. And then he did exactly the same the beginning of this war in February, when he said the negotiation will start on a Monday, and then on a Saturday he was bombing Iran. That is someone who thinks that he can really deal with geopolitics like he's dealing with selling of real estate. This is how he understands it, but lies have a very short life duration, and then it is obvious that he did not talk to the Iranian. However, today, Pakistan announced that they have received a letter from the Americans, and they will convey this letter to the Iranians. So there is a letter that was sent by the Americans to the Iranians, but after the announcement of Donald Trump saying that he is talking to someone in Iran, that the Israelis leaked as an information to be the Speaker of the Parliament, Galibaf, and then it turned out that Galibaf said, they're not talking to me, and I'm not interested to talk to them, and I'm not authorized to run this negotiation either. So today the Iranians have received the letter, and the 15 points mentioned by Donald Trump are correct. However, these 15 points belong to the Americans that were forwarded by the negotiators, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, that Iran refuses to negotiate with because they believe they are the one who instigated this war by misinforming Donald Trump of the content of the negotiation. This is where we are at in negotiating aspect. However, because everybody is achieving no objective so far apart from Iran is conducting a war of attrition and doesn't need to win because not going to win, but it doesn't need to lose. And that is a victory for Iran. This is where the American president is buying time. And I can develop that if you want to.
Yeah, yeah, definitely if you can, because there's also this context, as you mentioned, that Trump is deploying troops to the Middle East from the 82nd Airborne Division. This is a huge contradiction. Many have noted that the ceasefire 15 points looks like, of course, another attempt to get Iran to surrender. But there are also points in there that also show that the Trump administration is looking to or needing to, feeling the need to give concessions as well. So there's a huge contradiction, I feel like, in terms when it comes to not only the ceasefire plan, but also the U.S.'s actions. They are deploying troops as we speak. And of course, the mainstream media is talking over and over again about what they could be used for: Strait of Hormuz, Karg Island, etc. So your thoughts?
So, in as militarily, nobody negotiates from a weak position. Look what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. As things stand today, the war has not produced decisive results. The war on Iran has reached a form of a kind of strategic stalemate. Neither side is winning, but neither is losing decisively enough to impose an outcome. In these conditions, the logic of conflict shifts. It is no longer about battlefield gain, but about creating a leverage. So one side, here the Americans, need to generate a moment that alters the balance and forces a reaction, reshape the political trajectory of the war. Yet even such a leverage is achieved, it will be the beginning of the war, but not the end it. And don't laugh because I have my reasons. Because the opposition side, the Iran, will respond, will adapt, push back, and meaning the war remains far from conclusion. So Donald Trump is searching for a political and psychological gain, create a sudden shift in the balance of the conflict, and above all, spectacular, low risk, high visibility operation. It is not a full scale invasion, not an attempt to occupy all of Iran, but a very carefully chosen location, specific location that he can say, well, I am part of the controllers of the Strait of Hormuz, because at the end of the day, Trump has given up on regime change, on destroying the nuclear program, because he said they agreed to give us the 441 kilogram of 60%. They agreed to stop producing more enrichment uranium to higher percentage, which means they still have it. And if they still have it, he did not obliterate it as he claimed. On the missile program, he said he destroyed it completely, and we see missiles still falling on the Gulf countries and on Israel. Therefore, the logic is not to stop Iran, because it's impossible to stop it, but to have some control over the Strait of Hormuz. But that risk an uncontrollable escalation, and it will put the United States into an equation in a way that will alter the balance without triggering a total war. Therefore, a very limited occupation of a strategic place island, not necessarily the Karj Island. There are so many other islands, but he wants to achieve a visible, defensible, temporary defensible, and political usable gain and say, okay, I've controlled this island, let us stop. And here he makes another mistake. because the Iranians will not stop. On the contrary, even if he occupies island like Abu Musa, this lower and the larger Tom, the two other islands that are contested by the Emirates, the Iranians still consider these as Iranian territory. Therefore, with the very primitive weapons, they can bomb these islands daily and make sure that he will suffer a large casualties. But that means pushing Trump to become more dangerous. And hence my initial word saying this is the beginning and not the end of the war. Because Tehran perspective, it is that looks like kind of a diplomatic pressure and a message. But at the end of the day, this is a war imposed on Iran, and Iran will not allow Donald Trump to dictate it or to dictate the terms or decide when to stop it.
Yeah, great points, Elijah. And now, if you could maybe speak about how Iran's, especially in the last day, since the last time the show aired, about 24 hours from today, talk about how Iran's response to all of this on the battlefield, its strikes, its recent strikes, conform to its overall approach. Because I think overall, what we hear from Donald Trump is that they have nothing, everything is slowing down. Iran is begging to come to the table to reach an agreement, but it seems like the operations that Iran is running, especially even in just the last day, contradict this greatly.
Well, we don't need to speculate much or analyze this because Trump is saying that he has degraded or destroyed the Iranian missiles, and the Iranians are introducing every single day new missiles that are fired on Israel, and they firing on areas like Dimona, where the nuclear research center is. I mean, it's 15 kilometers away from the village, but they saying, well, we can hit the nuclear site if you hit our nuclear site. Therefore, the Iranians are showing different capability with the cluster bomb warhead inflicting serious damage on the Israelis. They bombing Haifa. They bombing all the military target that Israel doesn't allow any journalist or any information to come out about the damages. So everything that Donald Trump is saying, we observe the development on the ground and we see completely the opposite. We see how the Gulf countries are still bombed in their energy, in the hotels where the Israelis, where the Americans are. We see Iraq is a new element because Iraq is coming stronger in the battlefield. The Iraqi government summoned the US ambassador twice, chargé d'affaires, because the Americans are attacking the Iraqi security forces. And today they've attacked an Iraqi army hospital, killing 7 and wounding 13. So we see the war is developing. We see different part of Iraq is under attack from the Americans and from the Iranians and also from the Iraqi resistance. So there are really different forces interacting in Iraq. We, on the military aspect, Iran is not stopping from launching between 10 to 15 missiles and drones every single day. And Iran is conducting a very long war, thinking that this war is not going to stop from one day to another or from one week to another, which is rightly so, because if the Americans are bringing 5,000 troops, were they talking about the Marines and amphibious troop, but then they're talking about the 82nd Airborne coming into the Middle East. These are going to occupy a piece of land that is not very big, but also we see the A-10 and the Yampash helicopters active, and these two are active to clean the area along the coast and make sure that the landing of the American forces is going to be smooth in their opinion and their calculation. However, when the first clash starts, all these calculations can go up in the air. So for Iran, we have seen the Iranians maintaining a battle on bombing Qatar, Bahrain, the Emirates, Jordan, Kuwait, Iraq, and Israel. So conducting war on several fronts, sending missiles on several fronts. The Arabs said that several thousand missiles and drones were launched, which means that Iran is really not short of missile and drone. But because the Israelis are not really thinking in terms of having a very long war, this is where Benjamin Netanyahu came out and blamed the chief of the Mossad, the intelligence services, said, you said that in 3 or 4 days, the Iranian people will rise against their rulers and this war will end. And on the other hand, we've seen Donald Trump saying to Jared Kushner and with Steve Witkoff that you told me that Iran wants to make a bomb. And he said to the Minister of War, Hexit, that you were the first who said, let's go and bomb Iran. So immediately we see a shift of position where the two leaders who decided to go to war are attributing the reason why they went to others, but not to themselves.
Yeah. Well, then Elijah, talk about what the impact of Iran's strikes have been, because some might say, well, so what? So what that Iran is hitting is hitting Israel in this way, is hitting the Gulf in this way, and also just to remind the audience that this is all coming in the context of an ultimatum that Donald Trump gave that was supposed to it was characterized by the United States was going to strike Iran's electricity grid, its electrical grid, its energy facilities related to it. And that's been postponed for 5 days, which does coincide also with the expected arrival of some of these so-called ground forces. So maybe you can talk about what the impact has been of Iran's strikes, especially in the recent days, as we see all this chaos that you just commented about with the Trump administration in the United States talking about ceasefire talks and Iran contradicting this.
Well, we have seen the New York Times saying that all the US bases in the Middle East have been either completely destroyed or severely damaged. That is the impact of the Iranian missiles on the US bases. We have seen also attacks on hotels where the American officers are staying, and which means that the Iranians have updated intelligence information about the new location of the US officers. We also know that the Israelis, on daily basis, they're saying that the Iranian missiles are exploding into an open area, not causing damage, but then on Instagram, that is outside of the control of the Israelis. We see the real pictures and the real damage that the Iranian missiles are causing. And when it is served the Israeli propaganda, then they show some areas that have been deeply affected by the Iranian missiles. And Iran said, if you continue targeting our civilians, then we have the location of the shelters, and this is where we're going to start bombing as well. So the impact of the Iranian missiles on every single day, there are millions of Israelis that are forced into the shelter. Israel is completely paralyzed. Nobody's working in Israel. They all spend the time in the shelter every hour. For example, this morning there were within 40 minutes, there were 4 attacks, missile attacks. So people don't have really time to breathe and to go to shopping or to go to check their belonging. And the reason why is the Israelis supported this war by 80%. And the Iranians want to make sure that the Israelis who supported the war not only pay the price, but turn against Netanyahu and say, well, what are we achieving? From Donald Trump, there is a saying in America that call him taco, that he always chicken out. and giving 48 hours to the Iranians, thinking that deterrence by narrative could work against Iran. He made a mistake because Iran kept his word and is not playing around. And Iran said, I am going to bomb every single energy grid in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries. I'm going to bomb gas and oil, which means the whole world will suffer from the lack of oil and gas. Now, some people would argue that the Americans are bringing out oil reserves, 400 million barrels. The European will do the same. Just let me remind the audience that the world needs 103 million barrels daily. So if there are 400 million barrels as a reserve in the market, these can last 4 days, no more. After 4 days, so it is just postponing the problem. So what Iran is doing is making sure that everybody pay the price through missiles, through hitting what the Americans and the Israelis are hitting in Iran, reciprocating exactly the same. And this is what really scaring the Americans, because from their point of view, they crippled Iranian missiles. And when they say now we are free to fly over Iran, they're right. They're not lying, because Iran doesn't have an air force. And Iran never had a good air force because it did not invest in air force, because the Americans and the Israelis were the Americans, because Israel doesn't make jets. These are American jets, are of a fifth generation. The Iranian cannot compete with that. So what Iran is doing is investing in its missile program to control the sky over Israel and the Gulf with its missile program to strike a balance. And the moment we don't see any missile coming out of Iran, it means that is the end of the war.
Yeah, and Elijah, I'm curious on what you believe is motivating the United States right now to get into this, and Israel too, because both of them, of course, Israel is the one who leaked. The United States and Donald Trump have been now talking about talks, talks, talks. I'm curious on what you believe is motivating the United States and Israel to talk in this way now, given that we do see Iranian air defense is doing some more work now than even earlier in the war. I believe there were some reports that a JASSM missile was even shot down by Iranian air defenses in the last 24, 36 hours. And of course, now there's more information about the F-35 that was downed, that there's confirmation it was Iranian air defenses that did this, and the pilot actually was injured quite significantly. And reports of F-15, CENTCOM won't acknowledge this one, but in the last day or so, an F-15 was also down, I believe, over Kuwait again. So talk about what might be motivating the United States and Israel to come to the, or at least the United States, I should say, to talk in this way about peace. Is it simply manipulating the market, or is there also maybe other factors at play here?
Let me start with Israel. Nothing motivates Israel to stop the war, particularly when it has the United States on its side. The US Congressman Van Hollen said that the Israelis have been, and these are his words, the Israelis have been looking for a stupid American president to join the war on Iran, and and Netanyahu found Donald Trump. This is the congressman who said these words. You can Google it. So for the Israelis, destroying the state is important. Impoverishing Iran for the next 20 years at least is the objective. The objective is not to destroy Iranian missile or nuclear program, because the big really the big lie to the American people is the nuclear program. Donald Trump came out and he said Iran was prepared to make bombs within 2 weeks, or let's say 2 months, was ready. And this is why he went and bombed Iran. And that Steve Witkoff told him that the Iranians said, we have nuclear enrichment uranium. Oh, by the way, Steve Witkoff understands nothing about the technicality of the enrichment uranium. And this is why there was a British officer there who knew about it and was there as a supportive of the US delegation. And he said there was a breakthrough and the Iranian offered concessions like never before. So let me go back to the bombs, to the Iranian nuclear bombs. In June 2025, the Israelis and the Americans bombed Iran and bombed the nuclear facilities. Had the Iranian intention was to make a bomb, they would not wait 8 months to start threatening again and need 2 weeks to make a bomb. They would have made 11 bombs in these 8 months. But because they have a very clear stand that they don't want to make a bomb, this is why they did not go for a nuclear bomb. Right or wrong, that is their position. Therefore, the talk about Iran just weeks away from making a nuclear bomb is a false narrative. Now, for the Americans, Iran doesn't represent a national danger on its or a danger to the American national security. Because first, it's far away. Iran decided its missiles will be limited to 2,200 kilometers, and did not never attack the US bases in the Middle East, at the exception of one in January 2020 when the US killed the General Qasem Soleimani. So for the Americans, it's easy to stop the war. And it's easy when we're talking about the motivation of the war. But because the motivation of the war is the survival of Benjamin Netanyahu's political career, then when Donald Trump is going to stop putting Netanyahu as his priority and the priority of the American citizens above everybody else. So he is putting Netanyahu first, not America first. And because he's putting Netanyahu first, Netanyahu doesn't want to stop the war. He's bombing the customs, he's bombing 34 banks, bombing the hospitals, ambulances, schools, everything. He is not bombing the Iranian nuclear program. He is not bombing the Iranian missile program. He's bombing the state. He is impoverishing Iran. When he wants to bomb Iranian oil in Tehran, that has nothing to do with the military. Iran is one of the largest oil producers. They can immediately recover the oil that they have lost. So it is just to sabotage. And that can continue forever, as long as Donald Trump wants. However, on Donald Trump's side, because he's narcissistic and the personality of the person, he's not going to accept to say, I've lost. In fact, many countries are asking Iran to declare that, to Donald Trump, you won, because he needs only this word coming from Iran. However, if they say you won, the Iranian ruling system falls. And this is why there is an impasse. Iran is defending itself. This war is illegal and has no United Nations mandate for it, and no danger was represented from the side of Iran against the US. Therefore, it is not up to Iran to stop the war, it's up to the Americans. But then if the Americans want to stop the war, there's no trust. Who's going to play a go-between? Now we have Pakistan and Turkey who are coming forward, and they say we can play this role, and Oman also. However, they cannot guarantee that Donald Trump is not going to start another war in a year time. Because if he goes beyond the mid-elections and he wins, he's going to start another war. But if he loses and the Democrat win, then he will not be able to decide whatever he wants, because he will not have the Congress on his side. Therefore, the question is Donald Trump going to stop now before it is too late? Because the war is escalating and has never been less intense than the week before, and we are in the week number 4. Therefore, it is up to Donald Trump to decide. But Iran has request. Iran wants compensation. Iran wants the end of the war in the entire Middle East, including in Lebanon. Iran wants the lifting of the sanction. Iran doesn't want to negotiate again about the sanction one more time. Iran wants to negotiate a nuclear deal where the world is happy with the controlling of the enrichment uranium in Iran. Iran needs to be able to produce its own electricity and research with 3.75% to 20% uranium. And these are impossible demand for Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Elijah, maybe, Iran did, or at least it's reported that Iran did release a full set of conditions, and they've been talking about a full set of conditions of what it would mean for this war to end. And I'm curious if you believe there are any conditions that would actually, uh, 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 you know, uh, provide the impetus for the Trump administration to actually accept any of these, given that a lot of them, what I mean, all of them really, if they're taken in full or even in part, speak to Iran declaring victory itself, because a lot of these would be not only concessions to Iran, but would change the entire calculus in the region. So maybe you could talk about if there are any scenarios or conditions that would even allow any of these terms to be met for Iran. I'll give it to you.
Iran can uh, put the 441 percentage, 90% of enriched uranium under the total control of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Organization. That's for sure. It can give up on the control of this quantity only if the sanctions are lifted, because Iran doesn't need this kind of enrichment uranium because it doesn't use it. But it is a leverage. If the sanctions are gone, then there is no need for Iran to keep it if there is a guarantee that these sanctions will not return. And because the element of trust is lacking, therefore, it is a problem because a third party trusted by both sides need to come forward and say, okay, I keep them or I control them. And for the Americans, it is out of a question to keep them in Iran, and that's another problem. Iran is saying, "I want to continue enriching uranium domestically," and Trump said from day one, zero enrichment, which is again the international law because Iran has a right to enrich uranium for its electricity, generate power, and for its research for medical reasons. So these already are create a big conflict between the two sides. Paying the damages. Now the Arabs are saying, I want the damage to be paid by Iran. And Iran saying, well, no, Article 3314 allowed me to bomb you because you offered your land to the US. Therefore, you also need to compensate all the damages I have suffered from economically and the damage destroyed by the United States. And again, this is another dilemma because the Americans will not accept to pay. Donald Trump goes around the Middle East to take their money, not to pay back the money. So these already two difficult points. And the third point are the Iranian missile program. Iran is not ready to give up on a missile program or even to negotiate it or put it on a table or anyone to speak about it because it is the only defensive system that it has. And we've seen that in this war, that Iran only with its missile is managing to respond to to the Israelis and to the American aggression. Therefore, we are again back to the JCPOA of Barack Obama 2015 that Donald Trump cannot stick. And if we go back to the 2015, then why all these sanctions? Why breaking the contract of the JCPOA in 2018? Why starting the war? So all that doesn't make sense. And for the American to accept it and to lift sanctions on Iran and to give back Iran the dozens of billions of dollars that are frozen in different banks will be the end of Donald Trump's career. And he doesn't want that. So that is the dilemma that Donald Trump put himself in and put also Iran in it.
Those are
Sorry, the Israelis are happy because they're not concerned. They don't need to give money. If the Americans will pay the money, they don't need to say, well, we stop because they will be requested by the Americans to stop. They are bombing the Iranian state and infrastructure every single day. They are delighted. But have they achieved their objectives? No. Everybody renounced on the regime change objective from the first week when they saw that their objective is impossible to meet.
Yeah, and Elijah, I see a scenario where even if the US wants to pause or maybe even end, quote unquote, I don't think the overall objective against Iran from the United States will end. But I could even see a scenario where Israel continues and then therefore Iran continues, because Iran has said from the very beginning that they will be dictating this war. And if Israel, of course, won't abide by any kind of pause that the United States wants, then what motivation does Iran even have to stop itself? I don't know if you believe that could be a plausible scenario here too.
Sorry, what's a possible scenario?
That the entire narrative about ceasefire talks and coming to some kind of end to the war, even on the U.S. side, just goes away because Israel will continue to do what it's doing, as you just outlined there. And Iran, of course, will continue to strike back at Israel, regardless of whatever the U.S. says or even offers. I don't know if you see a scenario like that where Israel literally just tries to continue this war, keep the United States in it, no matter how much the United States attempts to concede to Iran and get Iran to take the bait of some kind of ceasefire deal or even a quote unquote peace deal.
Well, for the Iranians, there are points that are asking potentially possible. So, if we take, for example, the war in Afghanistan, the Americans invaded Afghanistan and they removed Taliban from the power. After 20 years, they gave back the power to Taliban and they left Afghanistan. The Iranians are asking now from the Americans to leave the Middle East. Actually, this is a fair demand for a simple reason. The Americans first started the war without consulting with the Middle Eastern countries and studied the consequences on them by starting a war only to please Benjamin Netanyahu. Secondly, the Americans failed to protect the Middle Eastern countries because most of the interception missile systems are in Israel and Jordan to help the Israeli intercept the missile before they arrive above Israel. So they intercept them in Jordan. Therefore, they left the Middle Eastern country to defend themselves with their own missile that they have acquired and to buy more missile of the United States. So there is no reason for them to stay. Donald Trump said, we have oil, we don't need oil. And in fact, 1% of the oil that crosses from the Strait of Hormuz goes to America. Therefore, with Venezuela, even if the oil is heavy in Venezuela, they can say, okay, well, we don't need the oil coming from the Middle East. Whatever they can say, it can be feasible. However, what they don't want is to dethrone the dollar, because the petrodollar is the most important part. If the Americans leave the Middle East, then Middle Eastern country will deal the selling of oil with the yuan. They would go to the Chinese. They will exchange with goods and services. They can do that with India. They can go to other countries and they do not need to use the dollar. That will be the end of the US finance, because the entire war is based on petrodollar. As long as the Gulf countries are using the dollar to sell their oil, then the United States consider itself kind of a safer economically. But if the United States leave the Middle East, then that will be the beginning of the crumbling of this empire. This is where the Americans cannot fulfill the request of the Iranians. So, a ceasefire based on concession that can be made on both sides is possible when the demands are within reason, not the demands are impossible on both sides. Now, of course, each side starts with the maximum demand to go down, but how far down are each side ready to go to? The Iranians want to make sure that this war is not going to happen again and that the Israelis are not going to start continue killing and target assassinating as they are doing in Gaza and Lebanon. This guarantee can be offered by the Americans. However, it's not enough. They need to make sure that this war will not return and that the sanctions are lifted on Iran so Iran can regain the construction with its own money because there are many uh, resources and strong assets in Iran that Tehran can benefit from. So all that needs a long time to unfold. This is why we don't have a visibility today.
Yeah, no, those are great points, Elijah. And I wanted to ask you about the military situation, especially when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz, because that's where a lot of the U.S.'s impetus right now in terms of talking about a ground invasion, all of this. It all has to do with what's happening at the Strait of Hormuz, seemingly. And I wanted to ask you then about the exhaustion possibly of the U.S. And Israel when it comes to continuing on this war, and how would a ground invasion perhaps exacerbate this, given that um, I think what we're seeing now more and more so is we've seen the U.S. now have to creep more closer and closer to Iranian air defenses. Every other day it seems like there's something being shot at or shot down, and CENTCOM is doing its best to hide these kind of things. But what role do you believe an exhausted U.S. military and, of course, Israeli defenses are going to play in the outcome of this war, given that, as you just said, this could go on for a very long time, and the Strait of Hormuz question is one that Iran does not seem to be budging from at all. Actually, it seems like they're enacting this kind of toll that has been reported in recent days, and asserting further the concrete character, I guess, of their control over it.
Donald Trump said he wants to control the Strait of Hormuz with the Ayatollah. These are his words, which means that he wants to be part of the presence on the Strait of Hormuz. He can't control it from afar. This is where the arrival of the troop makes sense because he wants these troops to land somewhere so they can have a foothold on the Strait of Hormuz. But it doesn't mean they can stay. So the whole battle now is no longer regime change, is the Strait of Hormuz and the control of energy. This is where we are at today. Therefore, for the Americans, it's important to have this control and stop the war, and then have a leverage on the Iranians. Without that, he cannot ask for the end of the war. But even if he asks, he's not going to be given because the Iranians want to make sure that they get back this land, or at least they make sure the Americans cannot stay safe in their piece of land. So the Strait of Hormuz has become important because of the price of oil, because of the navigation, and the insurance companies are raising the price, not because the Iranians stopped the Strait of Hormuz navigation. They said, we did not stop it. We've seen the Spaniards having their tankers delivering oil. We have seen India, China. We've seen so many countries capable of crossing with many tankers. The problem are the Israelis and the Americans and the British, because the British, according to Article 3314, are helping the Americans, therefore they are partner of this war. They offered Diego Garcia and Cyprus to support the Americans, and this is where Iran considered them partner in this war. So the Strait of Hormuz is not going to be closed unless it turns to a battlefield. And once it becomes a battlefield, then it will automatically close. No tanker will cross it, and no insurance company will accept any tanker or any ship to cross the Strait of Hormuz. So we are at a very decisive next week where we will have a more visibility on where the area is going toward which direction and how the presence of the American in the Strait of Hormuz is going to affect this war if the Americans are going to land there and where are they landing.
Yeah, right. And these forces are definitely not forces that are going to be sitting back. It seems like there will be some kind of operation, and that will change a lot, definitely, Elijah. And lastly, what I wanted to ask you about, we can get a bit deeper into this, is the regional situation, because I don't think many people expected the Iraqi resistance to be, I mean, they're working almost overtime, it seems like, and they've pushed NATO out of Iraq. They are constant. I believe in the last 2 days, they released videos of them attacking the Victoria base, the U.S. base there. There's talks about how the U.S. forces are now like stuck in Kurdish Iraq, so a huge withdrawal there. And of course, we have Hezbollah, which we haven't gone into, which is fighting very hard Israel, not only on the border, but also firing their own salvos, their own missile strikes and rocket strikes at Israel. So if you could talk about this, and Yemen hasn't even really come into this war yet. So perhaps you could give an outline of how this is impacting the war, because it doesn't get so much attention in mainstream media.
That's a very good question, and thank you for asking it. Many people consider that Iran, what they call, is calling upon its proxies. They're wrong. Not because they call these proxies and they are organic allies, but because uh, Benjamin Netanyahu said at the first beginning, the biggest danger now comes from the Shia and later from the new Sunni. And the new Sunni, he meant, sorry, Qatar and Turkey. And the Shia are the Shia of Lebanon, Hezbollah, the Shia of Iraq, and the Iranians. But also the Zaydi, that a branch of Islam closer to Sunni than Shia. Nevertheless, they have the same principle and objective to support the resistance and of self-determination, and they are anti-imperialist. Therefore, the one who made the war a religious war, and Benjamin Netanyahu, followed by the US Secretary of War, who said this is a religious ideological war between us and Iran and its allies, or he called them proxies. So the message that both leaders, the US and Israel, convey to the Shia of Lebanon that your turn will come one after the other. For Hezbollah, it was a brilliant strategy to start the war and launch these bombs on Israel because Israel is extremely busy with Iran. Therefore, the bulk of the Israeli Air Force is going toward Iran, hitting Iran all the time. This will reduce the pressure on Hezbollah in Lebanon and change the equation, because during 2024, Israel carried out in 1 week 1,400 attacks on Hezbollah. So far, they did not conduct more than 300 attacks in 3 weeks and a half. Therefore, it was in the advantage of Hezbollah to start a war where there is a diversion of Israeli forces on various fronts instead of only Hezbollah. The Iraqis are also the majority Shia. There were many voices before saying that the Iraqis need to give up their weapons, the Iraqi resistance should no longer exist, only the government, And why the Americans want only the government? For a simple reason that Iraq sell its oil, and the party who receive the Iraqi revenue that consists of 90% of Iraq total budget are the Americans. The money goes to the federal bank in America because of the 2003 war, and because this has been done and agreed upon this mechanism where all the money goes to America first and then comes back to Iraq. Therefore, for the Americans to deal with the government only, it can twist the arm of the government anytime and make sure that the government is starving. Also, it's very easy to bomb the official institutions of a government. So everybody knows where is the Ministry of Defense, where are the different divisions of a classical army are spread, and in 24, 48 hours, go with hundreds of jets, bomb everything, and then you have no longer an army that can face you. However, with the resistance, they are called the resistance because they know how to resist. They are part of the people, so they don't have a physical place, but they are kinetic, and they harass the enemy where the enemy cannot see them. This is why it is important for the Americans to see the Iraqi resistance giving up on its weapons, and they have to deal only with the Iraqi government. This didn't happen because the Americans are still in the country. They haven't left, they don't want to leave. And this is why the Iraqi resistance decided that, again, this is the best time because they will be under attack if Iran is defeated and the war on Iran ends. So it was in the advantage of all these forces in Iraq and in Lebanon to be part of this war, where the war effort of the Americans and the Israelis is divided among three main stages. And it was a clever move, which means that the Americans and the Israelis need to defeat all three together or none.
Yeah, and you know, with the Strait of Hormuz being controlled by Iran now, the question of when does the Ansar Allah come into play, which would be a huge card. And Elijah, I'm hearing now that in recent minutes, as we've been talking, that there are reports that Iran has said that if the U.S. does any kind of military operation on Iranian territory, attempts to seize anything, occupy, conduct any operation in Iran, that they are going to move on operations they've been training for to seize parts of the UAE and Bahraini coast, which, again, as you said earlier, Elijah, we'll know in the coming days and weeks, how much the situation will change and in which direction. And that would be a massive shift in a very, I guess, critical. I wonder if you have any comments on this.
Yes, because now with any attempt of Donald Trump to gain time, allowing the 5,000 men, 6,000 men to reach the Middle East, because he said the two batches of Marines and amphibious forces, plus the 82nd Airborne Force with the 1,000 men, are coming to the Middle East. He has already 50,000 men in the Middle East. Therefore, he doesn't need this kind of troops. He needs the specialized troops. He needs specialized troops in airborne. They need to land with the amphibious troop on a land that is a dry land coming from the sea. This is where his plans are. And this is why the reaction that you just read, which is the Iranian are going to react harshly on any occupation, because Iran will consider that any land that will be occupied is an Iranian land, even if contested by the Emirates. If we're talking about the smaller and the larger Tum and Abu Musa land, these three lands, or other around, maybe not Kaj, but other islands. So for that, it will trigger a very harsh Iranian reaction. And on the contrary, it will offer a possibility for Iran to use even primitive rockets or any kind of missiles against the island and inflict serious damage on the Americans, because the Americans will no longer be in the air. There will be infantry, there will be men on the ground not far from the Iranian missiles and rifle. And this is where the number of casualties will be much higher. And the problem, if Donald Trump doesn't stomach this number of casualties and then goes for another extreme reaction. So, inevitably, I have no doubt Iran will retaliate harshly. But again, I have no doubt that Donald Trump will accept these consequences without bombing Iran and trigger further retaliation.
Yeah, I mean, that's what you just outlined there is very serious, and so I hope the audience understands that, as you said, this is could be very much, very well the beginning of this war rather than the winding down of it. So, Elijah, in the final few minutes, I don't know if there's anything that we haven't spoken about yet that you'd like to outline here, given that these developments in this war are constantly shifting and changing.
Iran said it will not stop until the war in the Middle East stops, and that includes Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Iraqi resistance. With Iraq is easier because the Americans are now in the Kurdish area in Harir and in Erbil airport. But with Lebanon, it's completely different because Netanyahu will be extremely disappointed if the Americans ask him to stop the war, which means that Hezbollah won. And the Israelis thought that Hezbollah in the last 15 months, without responding, allowing the Lebanese government to reach a ceasefire, that Hezbollah was weak and without missile to respond. It turned out that Hezbollah actually is much stronger. We have no longer heard Benjamin Netanyahu speaking about assassinating Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah and bragging about it, because he saw the face of the new leadership. And every time Netanyahu kills a leader, there's a new one harder than the previous one with a very strong motivation to revenge. So that is going to be the biggest dilemma, because Netanyahu will be crucified by the opposition, saying, you have not achieved any objective in Gaza. You have not achieved any objective in Lebanon. And you certainly did not achieve the objective in Iran. So he will be the one to be blamed for crippling the economy and for failing to achieve any of the objectives. And that takes me back to the word of the director of the counterterrorism that resigned when he said, Israel has a formidable army to defend itself, but not to go out of the border. Israel cannot attack a non-state actor like Hezbollah and win, or a state actor like Iran. It has failed in both cases. It has tried with Hezbollah so many times. But because the presence of the Americans, Benjamin Netanyahu feels more protected and feels he can go beyond any limits. However, the day Donald Trump wants to stop, Netanyahu will contest that, but will not continue the war. But by not continuing the war, he needs to prepare himself for jail for the 3 cases of corruption he is going to face, because he failed to achieve the security that he promised the Israelis.
Yeah, and when Hezbollah did the ceasefire, Elijah, I've said on this program that that does not mean Hezbollah is gone, and we've seen Hezbollah come out with a ferocity that from the very beginning of this war, when Hezbollah entered just several days after February 28th, Israeli spokesperson said, "We were not expecting this to happen. We were not expecting to fight with such ferocity." And yeah, so this was a great show, Elijah. I wanted to make sure that everybody knows to hit the like button before we do head out of here. That helps keep the show going. Your website is in the video description, so people should definitely check out all of your work there. Is there anything you'd like to say before we head out of here?
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a real pleasure. And I like the interaction where people listen, and it's good if they put question forward so we can interact with them and respond to their question if they have any. But it's a great show. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much, Elijah. We will be back. I'll be definitely in touch with you. We'll head out together. Hit the like button, everyone. That helps boost the show so more people hear this conversation. And all the places to support Elijah and this work are in the video description. Until next time, bye bye.